What if the most expensive thing about a luxury SUV isn't the engine, but the feeling you get when you sit inside it? I thought I knew what luxury looked like. Then I stepped into this. A massive Maybach SUV with an enormous V8, a cabin that feels more like a private lounge than a car. And the kind of presence that makes people stop and stare before they even know what they're looking at. This isn't trying to be practical, it isn't trying to be subtle, and it definitely isn't trying to justify itself to the average buyer. This is about excess. It's about comfort taken to an almost ridiculous level. And if the price really approaches $500,000 depending on the specification and customization, there's one question that immediately comes to mind. What exactly are you paying for? Is this simply a Mercedes-Maybach GLS with every option imaginable? Or does a machine like this actually deliver an experience that feels worthy of VIP treatment? Today, we're going inside the world of the ultra-luxury SUV to find out. The presence of a Maybach, and the first thing you notice isn't the horsepower, it's the presence. Before you even open the door, the Maybach GLS makes a statement. The proportions are enormous. The body is tall and wide. The front end looks imposing without needing to rely on the aggressive styling of a traditional performance SUV. The Maybach identity comes through in the details: the grille, the chrome, the lighting, the wheels, the tiny design elements that most people would never notice individually, but together create a very specific impression. This isn't a vehicle designed to blend into traffic, it's designed to arrive, and that's an important distinction. A normal luxury SUV says, "I have money." A vehicle like this says, "I don't need to explain anything." You can imagine it pulling up outside a five-star hotel in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, or Beverly Hills. The doors open, someone steps out, and suddenly the entire vehicle becomes part of the arrival. That's what ultra-luxury manufacturers understand better than almost anyone. You're not just buying transportation, you're buying an entrance, stepping into the VIP cabin, but then you open the door, and that's when the experience really changes. The outside is impressive. The inside is where the Maybach starts making its argument. The cabin doesn't feel like you're simply sitting inside an SUV. It feels like you're entering a private environment. Soft leather surrounds you, metal and wood details are placed exactly where you'd expect them. The lighting is carefully controlled, the displays are enormous. And everywhere you look, there are small details designed to remind you that this isn't an ordinary vehicle. But here's the interesting part. Luxury isn't really about how many features you can put into a cabin, it's about how those features make you feel. The best luxury products don't constantly ask for your attention. They quietly make everything easier. You close the door, and the outside world starts disappearing. Road noise becomes distant, the cabin becomes calm, the seats begin adjusting around you. The climate system works without you thinking about it. And suddenly, you understand what this vehicle is trying to accomplish. It's not trying to make you feel like you're driving a fancy SUV. It's trying to make you forget that you're in a car at all. The V8 power. Now let's talk about the part enthusiasts will care about, the V8. Because underneath all of this luxury is serious performance. A high-output V8 gives the GLS the kind of effortless acceleration you'd expect from a much smaller performance vehicle. But that's not really the point. The most impressive thing about a powerful luxury SUV isn't how violently it accelerates. It's how little effort it seems to require. You press the accelerator, and this enormous machine moves forward with surprising urgency. There's no drama required, no need to rev the engine aggressively, no need to make the driver work for the performance. There's simply a wave of power, and that's exactly how a luxury vehicle should deliver it, quietly, effortlessly, almost casually. Because if you're sitting in the back of a $500,000 SUV, you don't necessarily want your driver turning every acceleration into a roller coaster. You want speed without discomfort, power without chaos, and that's where the Maybach philosophy becomes different from a traditional performance SUV. This isn't about proving how fast the SUV can go. It's about making speed feel effortless. The rear seat, where VIP really begins, but there's another side to this vehicle that's even more important: the rear seats. Because if you're paying this kind of money, there's a good chance you aren't buying it just to drive yourself. You may be buying it because you want someone else to drive you. And that's where the Maybach GLS becomes especially interesting. Step into the rear cabin and the priorities change completely. The back seats aren't treated like an afterthought. They're treated like the main event. You have enormous amounts of space. You have luxury seating designed around long-distance comfort. You have advanced entertainment and climate controls. And depending on the configuration, you can create an environment that feels remarkably close to a private lounge. This is where the word VIP finally starts making sense. Imagine finishing a long business meeting in Manhattan. You walk outside, the Maybach is waiting, you get into the rear seat, the door closes, you recline, the outside noise disappears. You have your own climate settings, your own entertainment, your own space. And instead of spending the next hour fighting traffic, you can work, relax, make a phone call, watch something, or simply do nothing. That's not transportation in the traditional sense. That's personal space that happens to move. The magic of the ride in this is why ultra-luxury SUVs have become so interesting. A traditional luxury sedan used to represent the ultimate chauffeur experience. But SUVs change the equation. You get the commanding seating position, more interior space, easier entry and exit, and the ability to travel almost anywhere while maintaining an extremely high level of comfort. The Maybach GLS takes that idea and pushes it to the extreme. But then we have to ask an important question. Does it actually feel special while you're driving? Because this is where expensive luxury vehicles can sometimes disappoint. You can add leather. You can add screens, you can add expensive materials, but if the vehicle doesn't ride beautifully, none of that matters. The suspension has an enormous job. You're moving a large, heavy SUV while trying to make the passengers feel like they're floating over the road. And that's not easy. Every bump, every expansion joint, every rough patch of pavement has to be managed. The goal is not necessarily to make the road disappear completely. The goal is to make the road feel less important. And when the suspension is working properly, that's exactly what happens. You stop thinking about the pavement, you stop thinking about the vehicle's size, you simply move. That's one of the defining characteristics of true luxury: effortlessness. The car does the work, you enjoy the result, when the V8 comes alive, and then there is the sound. This is where the V8 becomes part of the personality. A luxury SUV doesn't need to be loud. In fact, it shouldn't be loud most of the time. But knowing that a powerful engine is sitting under the hood gives the vehicle a completely different character. You can cruise through the city almost silently. Then you ask for more power. And suddenly the V8 reminds you that this isn't just a luxury lounge. There is serious machinery underneath. That contrast is part of the appeal. Calm when you want calm, power when you want power. Luxury when you want luxury, and presence all the time. The Maybach effect. But there's something else you notice after spending time around a vehicle like this. People react to it. And that's not something you can measure with horsepower. A sports car gets attention because people expect it to be fast. A supercar gets attention because it looks exotic. But a Maybach creates a different kind of curiosity. People look at the grille, they look at the wheels, they look at the interior through the windows, they wonder who is inside. And then they notice the badge. That's the Maybach effect. It isn't necessarily screaming for attention, it's creating curiosity, and that distinction is important. Because the people who buy ultra-luxury vehicles aren't always looking for the loudest possible design. Sometimes they want recognition from people who understand what they're looking at. It's the automotive equivalent of wearing a watch that only another watch enthusiast recognizes. To most people, it looks like a very expensive SUV. To someone who understands the details, it's something else entirely. Customization, making it yours, and that's also why customization matters so much at this level. When you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, you don't necessarily want the exact same vehicle as everyone else. You want your vehicle, different exterior finishes, different interior combinations, different materials, different wheels, different equipment, different levels of personalization. The more exclusive the vehicle becomes, the more important individuality becomes. And that's where the Maybach world starts moving away from the traditional luxury car market. You're no longer simply selecting a model, you're creating an environment. The $500,000 question, but now we have to talk about the elephant in the room: the price. Because a number approaching $500,000 sounds almost absurd when you hear it attached to an SUV. You could buy a house in some parts of America for that kind of money. You could buy several high-performance cars. You could buy a Ferrari, a Porsche, and a luxury SUV and still have money left depending on the models. So why would anyone spend this much on one SUV? That's the real question. And the answer isn't simply horsepower. It isn't acceleration. It isn't even the materials. It's exclusivity, it's convenience, it's comfort, it's personalization. And most importantly, it's status. At this level of the market, you're no longer paying only for what the vehicle can do. You're paying for how uncommon the experience is. You're paying for engineering that most buyers will never need. You're paying for materials that most cars don't offer. You're paying for craftsmanship. You're paying for the ability to walk into a dealership and create something that feels almost entirely your own. And you're paying for a vehicle that can perform multiple roles at once. It can be a chauffeur vehicle, a luxury family SUV, a long-distance cruiser, a business lounge, and a powerful performance machine, all in one package. Why someone would actually buy it, but here's where I think the Maybach GLS becomes most interesting. It isn't perfect. And it doesn't need to be. It's huge, it's expensive, it's complicated. It's unnecessary for almost everyone, and that's precisely the point. Ultra-luxury vehicles aren't designed around necessity. They're designed around desire. Nobody needs a $500,000 SUV. Just like nobody needs a mechanical watch that costs six figures. Nobody needs a private jet when commercial airlines exist. But luxury has never been about what you need. It's about what you want. And how far you're willing to go to get it. And the Maybach GLS represents that philosophy perfectly. The ultimate VIP experience. It takes something familiar, an SUV, and asks a very simple question. What if we removed almost every compromise? What if the seats were better? What if the ride were smoother? What if the cabin were quieter? What if the materials were richer? What if the technology were more advanced? What if there were more power than you could realistically use? And what if the entire experience was designed around making you feel important? That's what this vehicle represents. It's not trying to be the most practical SUV. It's not trying to be the best off-road vehicle. It's not trying to be the fastest SUV on the planet. It's trying to be something different. A rolling VIP lounge, and after experiencing it, that's probably the best way to describe it. The most impressive part isn't the giant grille, it isn't the V8, it isn't even the price. It's the way everything comes together, the moment the door closes, the moment the cabin becomes quiet, the moment the seat supports you perfectly, the moment the suspension smooths out the road. The moment the V8 delivers effortless power, and the moment you realize you're not simply being transported, you're being accommodated. That's the difference between a luxury vehicle and an ultra-luxury experience. Final verdict: so is the $500,000 Maybach GLS worth it? For the average driver, absolutely not. But for someone who wants one of the most extravagant SUV experiences money can buy, this is where the conversation gets very interesting. Because you're not really buying transportation. You're buying comfort, you're buying presence, you're buying exclusivity, you're buying the feeling that every detail around you was designed specifically for you. And that's what VIP really looks like. Not necessarily loud, not necessarily flashy, just incredibly comfortable, incredibly powerful. And almost completely unconcerned with what anything else costs. The Maybach GLS isn't trying to convince everyone that it's worth the money. It doesn't have to. It's built for the person who walks into the showroom already knowing the price, and simply asks one question: how much more can you customize it? And honestly, that's probably the most Maybach thing about it.